Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate you taking the time to be here. My name's Sam Drury, and I'm Head of User Experience at Centric. And today I want to talk to you about OTT, where to invest your UX and design time. Just as a little bit of background, we've been designing and developing OTT streaming products, TV streaming products for over 12 years now. We've been really fortunate in being able to work with the likes of NBC, CBS, Showtime, and UEFA, to name but a few. And coming back to the original question of where to invest your UX and design budget, why did I want to talk about this? Well, we've seen over the years lots and lots of time and effort wasted on the wrong activities within user experience design and visual design. And we've spent a lot of time speaking to end users, product owners, developers, designers, front-end support, basically anyone who has a hand in the production of an OTT app. And we've gained some really, really interesting insights that I want to share with you, but ultimately I want to help you design better products. So if we just start by taking a look at the sort of typical breakdown of an OTT product and where budget may be allocated, you'll see that the user experience design and visual design is very kind of front-loaded, and it's not very big typically. Maybe 15, if you're lucky, 20% of your budget will go towards user experience and visual design. And depending on the size of your team, that will translate into actual man days. And sometimes you won't have a lot of time, so it's really, really important that you use those days very, very efficiently when you have them. Now, if we break down user experience design and visual design workflows, you can see there's lots of activities that I'm not going to go into detail about, typical things that we would do when designing a product. But what I want to do today is just focus on 8 areas that I've highlighted that I feel don't get the time and attention they warrant, and those are the things that I want to talk about today. And they sit in the research piece, some of the detailed wireframing and user testing, the initial kind of screen design and end-to-end screen design, and then 3 other areas which aren't even on this kind of laundry list of typical activities that, again, I don't feel have been given due care and attention in the past. So the first of these is research. Now, product owners, stakeholders, CEOs, they'll all have their kind of own views and opinions on what they want from a product, what goals they're trying to meet, and they'll be very vocal about that, but ultimately, none of that really matters if it's not a product that your customers actually want to end up using, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out what happens if you're designing a product that your end users don't want to use. Now, when we talk about research, very often that's considered things like looking at analytics, reading App Store reviews, sending out a questionnaire to your users, or having a pop-up box coming up thinking, what do you think of this, what do you think of that? Now, that absolutely has its place, but people tend to get bored of completing them, or they don't fill them in. They lack the small details that really make a difference, and people only really tend to focus on the negative aspects when they're giving feedback in this manner. So what I want to talk about is the idea of spending the time and effort, and maybe the additional bit of budget required to speak to people face-to-face. And what we found is talking to people face-to-face and getting them to come to you and asking about these products and asking about their insights and their feedback. You get into the real small details that make a big difference when it comes to using a product, interacting with a product, discovering content, that sort of thing. And they can even give you little insights about how they interact and use a device, how they're navigating through. And you can almost think of it like observational research. You can see how they would navigate through content, and that's the sort of stuff that you can't get with these more sort of hands-off approaches to undertaking your research. You also have the opportunity to ask them about completely different areas of user experience that aren't necessarily related to your sector. So you can ask about, okay, which app or website completely unrelated to OTT or video streaming has the best sign-in process? Which product has the best way of discovering content? You can take some really, really interesting learning from those. The next thing I want to look at is designing with performance in mind. Now, no matter how amazing your user interface is, no matter how intuitive it is to discover the content within your application or whatever cool features you've got, if the actual product is slow, if it's sluggish, if it stutters, it's gonna be rubbish. No one wants to use it, and it's going to be a painful experience for them to use. Now, what we found is design teams have a habit of showcasing their designs on very glossy 4K HDR displays when presenting them to stakeholders because they look amazing. But at the end of the day, those very high-spec devices probably only make up a very, very small majority of what your actual end users are going to be using. And in reality, they're probably going to be using much lower spec devices, much older devices, devices with much lower resolution screens. And what we find is a lot of time gets wasted at the end of the kind of development phase, downscaling animations, simplifying transitions, reducing the amount of content on the screen because we've realized when we deploy it to a lower spec device, it's just not performing as we would want it to be. So how do you go about doing this? I think the key here is from the moment you put pencil to paper as part of the design process, just keep performance in mind at all times. As painful as it is, spend a lot of time using these really, really underpowered devices. Learn what they do well, learn what they do badly, and learn that in advance, and don't wait to find that out later on in the development process, because it's a lot more costly and ineffective to try and fix it later on in the development process. And at all times speak to your development team while you're designing and run by animations by them. Say, hey, if we do an animation like this or a transition like this, is it going to look nice or is it going to kind of grind to a halt on the lower end devices? The next bit is about cross-device familiarity. Now, in this industry, it's not uncommon to be tasked with the design of not just one platform, but for 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 different platforms simultaneously. And if we think about it from a user's perspective, they might well swap between that many devices day to day or week to week, depending on their particular circumstances, whether they're commuting to work, whether they're at home watching TV on the couch, or whether they're at work watching a streaming application on their desktop computer. And from their perspective, they want to be able to pick up and go from one device to another and have the same experience from one device to another. And they don't want to have to learn a new way of finding content on one device and then, on my TV I have to do it in a slightly different way. They don't want that unfamiliarity. They need this kind of this suite of applications to feel like a really cohesive family. Having said that, at the same time, you've got to be very mindful not to break design conventions for particular operating systems. So don't try and do something on your iOS device because you've done it on an Android or a Roku or something like that, and bring in design conventions just for the sake of familiarity, because you'll find yourself in a bit of trouble there. The way we've kind of solved this problem in the past is to have someone whose kind of sole responsibility is to be a user experience design gatekeeper. And their job is to continually compare the UX and the design of all of these different platforms side by side and make sure one design team isn't going off on a slight tangent and doing something a bit weird and wonderful because it looks cool. And basically just keeping an eye on things throughout the entire design process and flagging up any issues where all of a sudden conventions may be being broken or it's drifting off in maybe the wrong direction. The next thing I want to talk about is prototyping and the benefit of building prototypes as early as possible. If we think about a picture telling 1,000 words, if you think about an interactive prototype, it tells 100,000 words. And prototypes like these, this was created in principle, I think, do so many great things. First of all, they get stakeholders excited. They get everyone on the design and development team excited because all of a sudden what was a bunch of user stories, what was a bunch of maybe black and white wireframes and a couple of static screens, all of a sudden comes to life. And you've actually got a tangible product that you can start playing with, you can feel with, you can give feedback on, and it basically just kind of boosts morale a little bit the second you've got something that you can actually interact with. These are really, really quick to build, and they give a really, really good impression of what the final product's going to end up looking like. The other thing it does, and this is really good from a cost perspective, is it speeds up the sign-off. If your executive is someone who is going to have the end say of whether or not this goes into production, giving them an interactive prototype like this to actually play with just will speed up that sign-up process much, much quicker. The other thing it will do is let you see problems early. Is there a problem with the navigation? Does the layout of the content make sense? All of these things will come out really, really clear and really, really visually in this sort of thing here. And the other big benefit you have is you can actually then use these for user testing, which is obviously something you'll definitely want to be doing with your products. The next part is almost a statement of fact, really, and it's something that we've learned over the years. The fact that registration, subscription, account creation is almost certainly going to be the most painful part of the product design. There are so many kind of areas for people to trip up on, both from a design and development perspective, but also your end users. And examples might be second screen sign up. Are you asking your user to go from a big screen where they're consuming content down to a mobile device or a laptop in order to create an account? Do they understand that concept? It's a very, very common concept, but do they understand it? Do they even know the difference between registration and subscriptions? The idea of creating an account and then having to go somewhere and actually buy a subscription to bolt onto that account. Throw into the mix different pricing tiers, free trials. When does that trial expire? Are they aware of it? What happens when that trial expires? You can see where the confusion can start to be built up and where we need to be really clear and really good in our understanding of where these potential hazards lie. Throw into the mix the additional complication of asking users to sign in with their network provider. Coming back to text input with remote controls, if you're trying to input usernames, passwords, email addresses with a remote control on your TV, you're going to have some issues there. And then lastly, something that we should all be aware of is obviously the California Privacy Act coming into force and what that entails for registration and the retention of customer details. If you're planning on launching in Europe, the equivalent would be the GDPR rules and regulations that we've had for a couple of years now. Lots of stuff to think about there. In terms of mitigating the risk of all of this stuff, there's a couple of simple things you can do. First of all, don't leave it till the end. Very often we see, registration, we'll start thinking about that once we've got the nice glossy UI out of the way. Don't do that. Have it on people's minds right from the very start. If you have legal teams that need to get involved in this, get them involved from day one, because they're going to want to pore over every sentence, every word, every period. And again, that is not something you want to be leaving a week before you're about to launch, because they're going to want a long time to go over the legal copy that's regarding all of this stuff. Know about the California Privacy Act, know about GDPR inside out, because otherwise you'll get caught out. And again, just read up on it as early as you possibly can. And then lastly, are there things that you can do just to smooth the process from an end user's perspective? So for example, if you are saying, okay, if you're creating an account on a big screen on a TV and we're asking you to sign in on the web, how can we make that transition a bit smoother? Can you just collect a telephone number off them and SMS a link to their phone so they don't have to type in the URL that's presented on the screen? Little things like that you can think about just to make that experience a bit nicer for the user. And then lastly, the idea of, okay, if the user does get stuck, do you provide adequate support and documentation so they can figure out what's gone wrong, or they can understand all of the weird and wonderful ways that you're encouraging them to create accounts, and can they read about it in plain, concise English? This is what you need to do. Next thing is something I see a lot of product owners and executives doing a lot, and that's obsessing over the competition. There's a habit of people in maybe higher up positions who aren't necessarily in the kind of the weeds of the design and development process, who have said, hey, I've seen this product A and it has this amazing feature that does this, we need to have that. And I've seen product B that does this really cool thing, we need to have that in our product. And obviously doing your research, as I've said, is important, but you can get very, very obsessive with this, and it's something that you need to realize what you're looking at that's out on the market today is something that these guys built 6 months ago, a year ago, and they have the huge benefit of knowing if that worked or not. And they can then, they'll be in a position to make changes because they've learned from analytics and data that they've had available that it did all work, whereas you're just basically copying what's out there thinking, hey, that's cool, I'm not sure if it's actually any good. And so yeah, just be very, very mindful of taking too close a look at the competition. The next thing is quite boring, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but it boils down to the fact that, and it's common sense as well, an OTT product or any video streaming product could, in certain circumstances, have 300, 400, 500 different unique screens. And the difference between some of these screens could be literally the color of an outline around a button or something like that. And you can imagine once you start to get this sort of quantity of screens building up, unless you are incredibly regimented in your annotation, your labeling, your documentation, that's going to quickly turn into a bit of a mess, and you're going to have developers working from the wrong sets of screens. You maybe have QA teams QAing against the wrong sets of screens. So just be very, very mindful that these products can grow very big, and so organization is very, very important. Then lastly, and again, this is often left as an afterthought, what happens when things go wrong? We have nothing to do with Disney+, but I thought it was a pertinent example just to talk about what error messages do you show to your users, and do they make sense? These are, again, left until the last minute almost, just to throw in there. My word of advice just simply on this would be, user test your error messages. It doesn't have to be on a finished product, it can literally be the messages printed out on a piece of paper and said, what does this message mean to you? Does it make sense? Do you know how to fix a problem? Does it make you feel angry? Does it make you feel relieved that something's happening in the background that's trying to fix the problem? Like I said, it's these little things here that I think can make a big, big difference, and particularly in cases where people are spending money to access your service, they don't want to feel hard done by when they see something like this and don't know what's going on. Cool. So just to summarize, talk to real-life people as much as you possibly can. Get prototypes to play with as soon as you possibly can. Get registration, subscriptions sorted out even before that, because that's going to be a pain. And spend time thinking about the boring things, your labeling, your descriptions, your error messages. It doesn't seem that exciting, but these things make a difference. And hopefully, with all that in mind, you'll keep your viewers happy and your product teams as well.
Round of applause for UI Centric. Okay, well, you did actually leave a few minutes for questions.
Awesome.
So, who has a question? There's a lot of you in here. Somebody must have a question. User experience? I've never heard someone refer to part of his presentation as boring before. You might want to cut that part out.
Self-criticism.
Self-criticism. All right. Question about the boring or the interesting bits? Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay. I see one here. We have two questions.
I know you said don't look at your competition. Why is it sometimes when I look at something like how Netflix come out and Disney Plus, but then I'm looking at something like Hulu and Amazon and their user interface is horrible? Don't they see the fact that Netflix has a better user interface, or don't they see it at Disney Plus? I mean, literally, they'll have me watching, I'll go on Hulu and they'll have like movies from the 80s or something like that. They have no idea what my profile is, what I watched before. It's like the same thing a year ago. That's popping on the screen. Don't they want to make a better user interface?
They absolutely do, and what a user interface looks like is obviously very subjective. And lots of people, just like you say, Netflix looks great and content discovery is very easy compared to others. What you have to bear in mind with something like Netflix is they have the resources behind them in order to create these amazing user interfaces with cut-out logos and custom trailers and beautiful graphics that costs huge amounts of money. I know they have designed like entire floors of design teams who spend all day, every day, creating these stunning graphics on the phone. They don't have that. Nope. They want it, and I think they're realizing the value of it, and they probably do have it now, but Netflix had the good idea to get that sort of stuff done early, because to you and to me, it makes a difference, and it makes the experience that much nicer.
All right, Barry, you still have one? Hold on. We want to get you mic'd.
So the part of it, it kind of goes on, how do you bring discovery into that, when you look at the user interface? Because I look at Netflix and everything for discovery, it looks the same, and I have to how can you make discovery a little bit easier in your interface? Because it seems like a lot of times it's just the next layer, yeah. And it can kind of get lost and kind of gets the same. There's a lot of sameness.
Exactly, and that comes down to, again, your asset availability. So do you have all 16 by 9 thumbnails, or do you have nice portrait thumbnails, square thumbnails? If you have those at your disposal, fantastic, because like you said, these rails of content can get very samey, they can get very boring, and that's one of the first things we push our clients to invest in, is getting a multitude of different aspect ratios, because you can create a much richer, much nicer looking user experience. And then even taking it a step further, can I get images of characters cut out with a background that I can replace and stuff like that, and so on and so forth. It's having those assets available is what makes the difference.
We have time for one more quick question. I apologize for those of you we won't get to. Do you guys have a booth?
We do. TT10.
Okay, good. We should have mentioned it. I don't know. Nadine, why don't you tell them to mention the booth?
Well, we're understated.
Oh, you're understated.
Please come and see us at TT10 with any other questions.
I'm quite happy to come and continue answering a lot of questions. Come by the booth.
Come by the booth. All right, here's our last question for today.
What's your perspective on the role of user personalization or control in the UI? Some of your clients are interested in, or is it really just they get what they get?
Everyone's interested in it, and very rightly so. I think with personalization, you need to ensure that the user doesn't think it's a cynical ploy to get more data out of them. So if you're presenting content to me that I'm genuinely interested in watching, fantastic. Don't ask me to personalize my experience so that I can get more data from you. And very often it's black and white. That's exactly why they're doing it. Do it for the user's sake. And you can obviously learn some things as well about your end users. But ultimately, yeah, personalization is very, very important. People expect it now. And yeah, just do it in moderation and do it well, I think is the key.
Okay, Sam, we have a last order of business. Someone is going to win a 1.5-day user experience audit. We have one name at the top for you to read, and let's find out who the winner is.
It's Andrew Perez.
Andrew Perez, you are the winner.
Congratulations.
Come up and give yourself a round.